I'll tell you tales, but first, do you believe that the truth is hidden where the eyes can see? Now, detectives, put your mind at stake. Can you spot the difference between what's real and fake? Welcome to the Conundrum. Alright, here's how the Conundrum works. I'm going to tell you 3 stories. Some might be true, some might be false. That's up to you to decide, you to find out the clues, and figure out the truth. These stories are a little bit strange, so I hope you have a good time. What would you do for power? What are you willing to stake for a higher position? In our first story tonight, it deals with a man who's in a certain reach for power. Mayor, to be exact. A lot of people would do crazy things. But how far would you go? Let's find out. What can I do? What can I do? Walter was pacing the floor, back and forth, murmuring to himself. He was running against big names for mayor in 1979 in a small city. He had just started to dip his foot into politics, no longer than a year ago, but his team data showed that he had a 2% chance of winning. 2% was all Walter needed to hear to send his hopes into straight overdrive. Later that day, he decided to call up his friends and tell them the news. "How do you plan to win?" asked one of his friends. Walter was silent and deep into thought. Another friend said, "Maybe you should make a big donation to a famous charity." "No, stupid. He should drive around the city screaming for people to vote for him, to, get his name out there.
Visit sick people in the hospital.
Do something crazy." At last, Walter spoke, his eyes gleaming. "I should run my campaign out of the hospital," and he told his plan to his 2 closest friends. One was nodding his head in approval, and the other couldn't believe what he just heard.
"So you want us to beat you up?"
"Yes, after the mayor's ball ends, right as I'm walking to my car." "So we just punch and kick you a few times and run away?" "Yes. So when I run my campaign, I gain the sympathy of the voters and the added publicity of doing it out of a hospital bed." Walter could see his friends agreeing hesitantly. They knew he was desperate to accomplish something in his life after his restaurant failed years ago. Walter was grinning from ear to ear, and by the end of the night, everyone agreed to the proposal. On the night of the mayor's ball, everything was according to plan. He was walking to his car and saw his friends loudly whispering behind a column. Walter also saw a few potential witnesses, far enough to not recognize him, but close enough to hear him scream. Suddenly, his friends had come and caught Walter off guard, and the entire beatdown and dash was so quick he didn't have time to alert the other people. His plan began to crumble. His friends hadn't had done enough damage to be visible, and only a few witnesses were too busy to even realize what just happened to Walter. Walter started to panic. He knew the original plan wasn't enough, so he took out his pocket knife and stabbed himself in the thigh. He screamed at the top of his lungs. This was more painful than he expected. He pulled the knife out and snuck it back into his pocket. Walter screamed again, holding his leg this time as blood started to flow and eventually gush out. Some of the witnesses ran over to assist his leg, and some called the ambulance. No one knew exactly what happened, and no one knew exactly what to do except to wait for help. And before the ambulance could even arrive on the scene, poor Walter had died due to blood loss and greedy ambition. Did I surprise you? Probably not. But in our next story, a teacher gets a surprise of a lifetime from one of her students. We all have that teacher we like to give gifts to, but this next story might shock you. For today's lesson, I have decided to bring in the overhead projector to change the pace of my stale class. Learning about chromosomes and how they determine the sex of a baby always captivated me growing up. I walked into class, fired up the old projector, and turned off the lights. Halfway through my lecture, I heard,
"Miss Kool,"
from one of my students. Jenny, a good student, slim and pretty, hunched herself over the desk. She can hardly make out the words as she held her arm above her. "And the chromosomes appear either one or two ways." My voice trailed off as I noticed Jenny looking flushed and drained. Our high school had come down with an epidemic of students arriving intoxicated. Although Jenny had managed to keep her grades up, I wouldn't put it past any students to fall victim to peer pressure and intoxication. If you insist on coming sick to school, you have to play the part of the student like all your other peers and pay attention.
"Miss Kool, I'm really not. Can we turn the lights down?"
She was holding her stomach. Bright lights and a hangover never really did mix well. I chuckled, dimmed the projector slightly, and resumed my fascinating lecture. The chromosomes either come in pairs of two X chromosomes or one X and one Y chromosome.
"Miss Kool."
Jenny had started to turn green. Annoyed, I smacked my hand down on top of the projector, spreading a giant black handprint on the wall across the screen. "Jenny, if you're going to throw up your late night debauchery ritual, you can go to the bathroom. But I want your peers to see that frivolous experimentation shows no benefits to either to make you ill or incapacitated."
"I don't have to throw up. I don't think."
She started to get up from her desk and wobbled as she stood. "You're being a major." I started to reprimand her, but I paused because she stopped mid-motion and slammed down on the floor. Another student that sits behind Jenny screamed and pointed. She peed herself. The class burst into shrieks and laughter. I rushed over, panicking, mouth dropped to the floor. "No, students. No, we have an emergency." The paramedics were called immediately. I spent the minutes before their arrival telling the students to move everything against the wall and stand there quietly. When the paramedics arrived, I started to whisper something to them, my voice trembling so much. The paramedic knew where I was heading and checked her before I even finished what I was saying.
Yes, she's in labor right now. Don't move her. Please, get back, ma'am."
I put my hands over my mouth and walked over to the rest of the students. There was no space to evacuate while a team of medical personnel came in and out of the classroom. Time stopped, sounds faded, and there, the finest biology lesson the school had ever seen took place in front of our very eyes. Jenny, at only 16, gave birth to a little girl. At which point, one of the students said, "So, that's an example of two X chromosomes, right?" You know, there's no coincidences in life. Or is there? A lot of people have certain purposes. Some people would call it disasters, some people call it miracles. In our next story, in our final story actually, it's about a miracle. It's about the strength of within. It's about being a hero. Daniel was one of the fastest rising star driver his local NASCAR circuit had ever seen. His career seemed unstoppable, and every day, when Daniel woke up, he leapt out of bed feeling like a hero. But just as one bad turn can force the driver to meet his maker, one reversal of fortune served up more than Daniel can handle. Driving home from church, where he has sent prayer after prayer to protect him during his upcoming race, Daniel found himself moments from fate. Just across the street, he saw a culprit running far ahead of the police, knocking people over, with the officer dodging both pedestrians and traffic. Daniel found himself inspired to act. He pressed his foot on the accelerator, shifted quickly, and pulled over just in front of the running perpetrator. He opened his car door and yelled to stop. At this moment, instead of running from Daniel's car, the perpetrator pulled out a gun. Daniel reached forward to grab the man by the arm, but he was too strong and threw Daniel back to the ground, hitting the edge of the sidewalk. Thud! Daniel felt a hard, blanketing pain ripple through his back, and then nothing. He awoke in the hospital, dazed and foggy. He tried to get out of bed when the doctor walked in. The doctor placed the sheet back over him and looked Daniels in the eye. A grim look was on his face, and then he realized why he can only just remove the sheets. The doctor had told him that he would never walk again. Daniel watched as his entire life slipped away from him. His career was officially over. His wife decided to move on, taking the kids with her, and little by little, medical bills chewed away at his meager savings. After being released from the hospital, all he could afford was a studio apartment with a ramp on the bad side of town. To pass time, he'd sit on a small outdoor porch area and watch the cars whip by on the nearby overpass, trying to relive his racetrack memories. Years have passed, and one day, like almost every day, he was sleeping on the porch, dreaming of running and racing, when he heard a scream and a violent bang. At that, Daniel leapt up like a hero. He landed on his feet, almost a yard away from his wheelchair. His legs immediately buckled, weak from years to next to no use. But the adrenaline in his veins remembered the years he spent behind the wheel. His eyes was wide as he saw a man running away from a woman who was crying for help. He had a bag in his arm and a rabid look on his face. Right as the man passed by the porch, Daniel mustered every ounce of strength he had and fell forward, right on top of the man. The thing that had changed for the better was Daniel's arm strength. Years of using his arms for everything had made Daniel strong as an ox. He muscled the man down and pinned him until the cops arrived. When he finally let go, Daniel stood to his feet, not even thinking about his legs. Whatever had happened to him was nothing short of a miracle. But to the women, police, and everyone who heard Daniel's story, they simply knew him as a hero. All right, how'd you think you did? Let's see what's true. So, how'd you do? Did you get all of them right? Were they too easy? Don't worry, it's just a pilot episode. Just a little test of your skills. You didn't get any right? You're giving me way too much credit. Alright, until next time, goodbye.